Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Welcome to Starting from Square One. This is an amazing collaboration that we are so glad to be a part of with the Boston Foundation and Venture Cafe. As always, the Venture Cafe team has been amazing, and we're so grateful for all of their support with the program logistics and promotion. Every month, we showcase amazing leaders, and today is no exception. Just so that you know, my name is Gabriela Ramirez Arellano, and I am thrilled to lead the Center for Emerging Technologies, which is the largest and oldest innovation center in Missouri. I'm also the director of entrepreneurship at Cortex and a volunteer at the Boston Foundation. The Center for Emerging Technologies is nationally recognized for providing an infrastructure and types of resources that early stage businesses need through our signature programs like Square One Ignite and the Boot Camp, which Joy and Jane are a part of and we're so excited about. And so while I have you, I'd like to invite you to check out our startup toolkit that includes trainings and other material at cetstl.com. I'll make sure that I put that information in the chat so that you can check it out later. Also, we've been working on our new show, which is Fueling Innovation, so be sure to check that out. I'll also include that in the comments so that if you're a graduate of Square One and you're interested in participating, we'd love to have you and have you as a guest to share, what your lessons learned have been. So now let's just go ahead and get started and bring to our stage Joy and Jay Williams of Ninnico as we talk about choosing a business structure for your small business. Because let's face it, when you start a business, deciding on a legal structure is usually one of the first things you have to make a decision about. So I'll let Joy and Jane come on and introduce yourselves. I'll interject a few things that I have from your bio as well, but why don't you guys tell us a little bit about you, because I know you've had a lot of experience in small business before even starting this organization.
Go ahead.
Okay, so yeah,
we're also sisters if you don't realize that part.
So I'm Jane and this is Joy. And so we do come from a family of entrepreneurs dating back to our grandfather, literally in the early, 1900s, that then went to our father, who had a heating and cooling company for several successful years through our childhood. We branched out on our own in 2009. With a new business structure that we felt that was a better fit for us, and we're able to grow and sell that in 2019. And during that process, we were actually working on what we call our passion project, which is now known as Ninnico, where we feature a pacifier geared towards pacifying breastfed babies. So the shape of it, the movement, the softness, is really different than anything that's on the market. And we're actually finding that it's more of a baby soother, a breastfed baby soother, than what you would actually call a pacifier. So it's pretty exciting. But as we're getting into this new industry, which is we are e-commerce, so we are selling online. We are starting to do trade shows, to get our name out. But we have decided to go at the company doing it online and kind of starting slow and really wanting to build
it. And
awesome.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, yeah. So, I mean, Jane summed it up. Our background, she and I both come from film and television backgrounds, actually. She went to film school in Miami, Florida. I went to school at Loyola in Chicago. We both had, careers working in those fields for some years. Ended up coming back working for our dad in the heating and cooling business. And then, like Jane mentioned, we had the way things were going. We had an idea for taking a portion of our dad's business and growing that. And we did it. Like, we just kind of took a very male-dominated industry and said that we could bring something different to our region here in St. Louis, that there was something we could add to homeowners. And we did that. And then we successfully grew it for 10 years and then sold it. And like Jane said, and the whole time we had 6 kids between the two of us. We were having children throughout this time. I wrapped that up. It was very stressful. But in that came the idea for Ninnico, like she mentioned, that passion project that we worked on, and what we like to call, we don't have spare time, but we like to call it the mom cracks of time. We would just kind of make that space and say, this is what our future looks like, even though nothing showed us that that was actually going to be the case. We just had the mindset to say, we're not going to stop. Every closed door, we're going to keep pushing it down. So
Yeah.
It's quite the journey.
It sounds like it has been, and you guys have been very busy. So let me backtrack a little bit. You guys are serial entrepreneurs from a family of entrepreneurs, and then you started this new organization. Can you talk a little bit before we talk about business structure? How was your journey participating with Square One? How did you start? Where are you now? And how has the business evolved? And have you leveraged your participation in the program?
I can talk about this, how we got into it. So I really, Jane handles a lot of the finances and a lot of, when it comes to logistics and a lot of all the things and, you know, procuring a lot of our manufacturing and distribution things. For me, my background, I'm marketing, business development, that type of thing. When you're creating a project or a product, like we literally created a product in a baby space because we had the need, right? We knew nothing about the baby space per se, the baby products industry. We just knew that we had a need and it wasn't being met. And so naturally you're thinking, okay, we work in construction. How do we do this? So I just went on like Googling, like what's in St. Louis? What's in the Midwest? Like what's out there? And Square One and the CET came up and the contact information for Christy Maxfield appeared. I reached out to her, and at the time, the Square One program was closed for that particular session, but she said, but let's get together. Let's see where you are with your business plan. And then we can look at putting you in Square One for the next semester. And we were still early on, like we might've had a prototype. We had no patent, like it was just an idea really still.
Yeah, because like she mentioned, when we did say we started from scratch, we literally said, well, let's at least meet with a lawyer and see, has somebody patented this idea already? You know, because, you know, you can have a great idea, you want to do all of this work, and then come to find out somebody owns the utility on it, then you're kind of dead in the water. So we did meet with an attorney, and she did tell us that somebody patented the idea, but did not have a product. So we didn't have, and it's a good thing we didn't know the journey that was up ahead, but she gave us the hope to say, if you can come back to me with a tangible product with what it's going to be made of, then I feel we can get around this patent. So then that's where Joy and I really built up the momentum to say, great, let's try to get introduced to people. And the truth of the matter is, each door we walked into, we were very blessed to be introduced to our next step. So when we went to the lawyer, then she introduced us to a gentleman named Gary Kelman, who has been in the entrepreneur as well as in products, who then was kind of telling us about the prototype. And that's where we ended up. We started out Square One, pretty much like Joy mentioned, knowing that we want to go after our patent, but at the time we got the we didn't get the patent. What is it called whenever you
had the provisional patent?
Yeah, we had a provisional patent, which gives you a year to
figure out what the heck you're doing,
figure out what you do, and kind of save the spot where you're at that date, to then a year later say, okay, we're ready to file the patent. So that's how we came into the CET.
And after having formed or been a part of several organizations, how did you decide on your business structure? What did you take into consideration? And what were some of those things that help you decide, you know, where to go next?
That's a really great question. So our father actually had a corporation. So when he had his company and it was a corporation, in 2009, I don't know, for those who remember, it became a tough time. And what we were able to see, that if you choose to be structured as a corporation, that you have a lot of liability as a person for if the company doesn't make it. So then that's when we were introduced, which is a lot more popular now, is limited liability corporations, which is exactly what it says. It limits your liability. So we recognize, for one, we want to have a patent in its own liability or company that can then be licensed out to our distribution company.
We can get in all that later.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Don't get me, you know, like she said, I do the structuring side, but I say all that to say, so we did decide we wanted to be a limited liability corporation, but all of that we learned, we have an amazing CPA. And it's, every company is different. So once you sit down and figure out what you're looking to achieve, do you want to go public? You know, that's who really helped us figure out the structure, as well as our lawyer, when we got through with our, you know, getting incorporated, which we did that early on too.
Yeah, so it sounds like it really is a partnership, right? So you have to have your attorney as well as your
Yes.
CPA to kind of help you understand. What would you say to small businesses that are getting started and maybe don't have the resources to have a CPA and an attorney?
Mhm.
Is there a safe space to get started, or what do you recommend?
Yeah, and I can definitely speak to that. The Square One program was perfect. So let us just paint this picture, right? We didn't have the resources either, right? And I think a lot of times you hear the words CPA, you hear the words attorney, and you think, I can't afford that. But there is honestly someone out there for every price point. Like, we were the last people to be like, oh, we've got this legal team, we've got that. We didn't have money. But what we did is we researched, and you call people and you say, listen, do you know how many times I heard Jane on the phone talking to an attorney saying, all that sounds great, and I'm sure you're worth every penny that you just mentioned, but we don't have it. And then it was amazing how people would come back and they would be passionate about your project. Specifically, the attorney that we worked with, he was like, listen, I've looked into this project and I feel almost as like invested in it as you are. So I'm going on this journey with you. There are a lot of, like, Jane and I kind of coined this term on our route. We call them destiny helpers, and everybody's got them, because if you're the only one in the world that believes in your project, we made an agreement early on that we weren't going to work with anybody who didn't see our vision. Now, that was plenty of people who were like, I just don't get it.
And
And
we
you
get
know
a
what?
lot of no's.
Yeah, and that's cool.
Okay.
Like, it wasn't cool at first. We'd be scared to even talk to people because we'd be like, would they say no? And it's like, it just becomes part of it, right? But what I will say is, when you say you don't have the money, this is the truth of the matter. You can't afford not to hire someone to do it correctly, because it's going to screw you in the long run, right? Because, like, let's just say you start out as a corporation. There's no coming back from that. Like, you can, for example, start out as an LLC and you can one time change, you know, your business structure or how you so you need somebody to give you that good sound advice so you don't make a decision that's permanent. And there's
saying that, I do want to add, though, we did meet the lawyer that helped us get our patent through the CET.
We sure
so
did.
As you sit through the classes, it put us in a space to where we had not met other entrepreneurs. We didn't know that there were other people in St. Louis who are shooting these crazy dreams that they're like, I just believe this is what I was made to do. And there's something to be said about being in those environments, because inspiration is key. And also, when you're challenged in the right way, around other people asking good questions who you can share your experience, it helps you get core centered to say. And we had some people in our group that said, you know what, I'm pivoting. This isn't what I thought it was going to be. Or, you know what, my idea is not as great. Or, like, for Joy and I, we said, we're going at this, you know, all in. You know, we got very core centered. We learned how to get our pitch down. You know, before we went in there, we didn't even know what a pitch was.
We didn't know what an elevator pitch was.
Yeah, I was like, elevator. We talk a lot. You know, you tell me I have to get this out by the time I go from the first floor to the top. I mean,
this is never going to happen.
But the great thing is, they really did help us learn to get your elevator pitch down. So when we found ourselves caught off guard, and you're in just recently, there was someone talking to us about Canadian distribution. We thought we're having an intro conversation, and she already knew about us. The minute I got on there, she was like, let me hear your elevator pitch. Now it hits like that, because I was like, thanks to Mark Bauer, you know, he quizzed us on it so much. And I'm appreciative of it, because there's things like that that laid down our foundation. So we met our lawyer, Stock Legal. Sarah Stock came to speak, and it really spoke to us, because she mentioned that one of the reasons that she built her platform, her structure, her company, is to help startups. And it's okay to ask. That's what we heard. There's no harm in asking. So Joy and I would ask questions. We would go in and take meetings. And like she said, sometimes people would be, we're not interested.
Or you can't do that, or, you know.
Or nobody does that.
Right, you get used to that type of thing.
But we just, you know, we kept throwing our net out there. But we learned about, you know, how to your entities. We met a lot of people through the CET that helped us get into the manufacturing space, because we never even been there before. And it's amazing. You can go into it and think, who am I going to meet when I get there? You don't have
any clue. It's going to be a waste of time. I'm going to be sitting here in all these meetings and listening to all these people speak, but you're going to get out of it what you
Yeah, and you don't have a clue
Look,
who you're going to meet.
somebody asked a question. Would you give us the elevator
Yeah,
pitch?
so Doug wants to hear your elevator pitch.
How do you feel?
I like that. Okay, so our Ninnico
Look at she
pacifier.
like
I'm
switched
hitting
on
it.
to,
You
she
ready?
said,
I know.
Okay, here we go.
So we have the Ninnico pacifier, which is twice as soft as any other pacifier on the market. It is shaped similar to the areola in the nipple of a woman that allows for the baby to latch on similar to the way that it does during breastfeeding. And it applies movement that only takes place when they're latched on to mom. So it allows them to be pacified while non-nutritively sucking.
Wow, she got technology in there. She got the whole latching on thing. Amazing.
He said, I'm in.
I was gonna say you can go on to ninnico.com if you know any breastfed moms, or if you hear of any friends that say that they're having a hard time sleeping, they're trying to wean their baby off, maybe have a lip or tongue tie, needing correction. Our pacifier really does help. So it cuts out nipple confusion, which is a real thing for all those breastfed moms, who know, and it is a concern. And it really does help, with the orthodontics, because there are some babies out there who you hear if they latch on or have been having a pacifier for past 2 years old, it can start to cause, the problems with the way that it forms. So we really like to merge that, and we like to be a support to moms.
Awesome. And it sounds like you guys have not only adjusted, but pivoted and changed things and learned things along the way. So before I bring Andy on, at what point did you decide what sort of structure you wanted to be? I mean, you had worked with the corporation structure with your dad, you mentioned. So how did you guys decide that the LLC was the one for you guys?
It was in 2015. We did it very early on. We didn't
It's
launch.
our first business we decided to be.
It was with our first, but with Ninny, just keeping it all things Ninny. So in 2015 is when we decided to get our legal structure. Even though she is my sister, we are business partners. And as much as we are close and we plan to do this, if you have a partner, I strongly suggest you get an operating agreement so you understand what each person is putting in, what they're expecting to get out, who owns how many shares. And we went in and did that right away. 2015, we decided to become a limited liability corporation.
Why?
As we're younger and, we very much need to help provide for our families. To think about right now, putting our liability on there with small children and husbands and just starting homes and having loans, it just didn't seem, right for us, because we can always change and become a corporation down the line. So we'd rather have what you'd call an escape plan in the event it wasn't what we thought it was going to be, because at the time it was just a concept. So that's where we decided to do, the LLC, and did it in 2015. We launched in March 1st of 2021. So just to let you know
7 years
how
later,
quickly,
or 6.
in the journey, we got the structure and the legal down. So as we did take on investors, as we did do this, we had already worked out between the two of us how we wanted it structured, what the ownership looks like. Please get that out of the way in the beginning. Don't think we'll talk about it later.
No.
And this is like my best friend and my sister. And I'm telling you, it has come in handy.
Yeah, and I love that you're talking about that, because I've been in a situation where I had an LLC and a partner, but we didn't have an operating agreement. And so one day the money was just missing. And so it's really important, not only financially, but as far as everyday responsibilities. When you have a partner, who's going to do what? And how do you hold each other accountable, right? And so someone is asking in the chat, what is your vision for the business?
Yeah, so and I can speak to that. So Jane and I both we were presented, because since we do own a utility patent on our design, and it is so different. So there was a woman who just come in, I believe it was the dentist, who just said, thank you for being mindful of the shape of babies' mouths. What we didn't expect was that came out of a need. Just moms needed something shaped like ourselves in order to keep the baby soothed properly. But what we didn't realize was, by keeping that same proper latch engaged, that we were turning on something in the mouth that now occupational therapists, speech therapists, IBCLCs, which stands for Internationally Board Certified Lactation Consultants, pediatric dentists, all these people have reached out to us, started contacting us saying, hey, like, this is a big deal. Like, no pacifier company has ever cared about baby's mouth. So I need you in my practice, like to use as a therapy tool, to work on suck training, to work on lip and tongue tie revision therapy training, right? So it's vision can be one thing, and then it started shifting, right? So now we're like, wow, now not only are we a soother that moms buy, but now we're a therapeutic device. Where we see ourselves being is this: we don't have a plan after this. Like, of course, if the right amount of money came around, Jane and I would talk about it and we would discuss it at that time. But our goal is to grow this company to basically elevate the way that babies are nurtured. That's so important to us as moms. You've got these big box brands, these companies that are working in factories saying, what can be the next fad? What's the next big thing? But they don't really care as much about baby's development and making sure that what you do from day one is going to lend to baby being successful, say at 35 years old. And we do care about that.
Yeah.
So
But
that's where we're on
like
a journey from.
An actual structure of what we plan to do. We have seen when you try to grow too big too fast, especially with the kind of investment money, because we wanted to hold on to so much percentage of our company, that we feel the best thing for us to do is build our solid foundation. Before we went out and ordered a whole bunch of inventory and decided to spend all this money on marketing and our website, we had to prove that our concept was actually a product. And we just, did this in March. So in these last 4 months, we've been able to prove that. So what we do see is we like to keep selling off of our website because that gives Joy and I the highest profit margins. A lot of people ask, when are you going to Amazon? Well, you got to be ready to scale. We're still self-fulfilling. We have to come up with our professional packaging and work on, different things to allow it to scale. Even with our manufacturer, they're able to get us certain numbers out, but we're still working out manufacturing kinks that if we ask them to give us 100,000 units, it's going to take a while. So we want to do it the right way because you don't want to sabotage yourself to say, great, let's get in front of a celebrity. Awesome. If 100,000 people went on our website right now and tried to order it, we're going to disappoint like 990,000 of them. You know what I'm saying? So we're trying to grow it properly, and we had to get core centered. What do we want? Do Joy and I really want to spend our time growing, say, a company with all these employees when we have these small children and what have you? We are making the decision. We think we want to go mostly distribution where we can handle it this way, but then do a lot of outsourcing when it goes internationally and into hospitals, which we're working on, to more or less become a supplier, distribute those large amounts, allow somebody else to handle a lot of it outside of America as well as in the hospitals. Yeah, we want to make money off of each pacifier that goes over there, but we don't want to handle the liabilities. We don't want to have to travel every time a new store wants to offer us. We'd rather somebody else do that. So that all came into us getting core centered on, one, what kind of life are you trying to live? Some people might tell you, I want to be the CEO. I want to travel overseas. And that's amazing. But a lot of it, we had to make our minds up to say, we also are moms and wives and things. Need to bring twice as.
Being twice as soft as your main value proposition.
I'm sorry, I don't have my glasses on.
Wow.
Daniel is asking, when doing your research, what led to being twice as soft being your main value proposition?
Yeah, so
well, I would personal, human anatomy, being breastfed moms, you grab a regular pacifier, you're like, what the heck? Like, how is that breast like? It's rigid, it's tough. Like, in no way does it manipulate, right? Or does it actually motivate a baby to have to use the same open mouth, wide latch? You could just watch when your baby's latched onto you versus if you give them a pacifier, just how strong that transition was.
But
and what
tangibly, when we went to manufacturing, you start to test different durometers of silicone. So current pacifiers are more of a 40 durometer. That's that. So you can actually just change the softness. And this happened with us partnering up with the right manufacturer to say, let's make it twice as soft. And in that, we were testing it on, babies, because we were using BPA-free, phthalate-free, medical silicone. But at this point, we're like, how soft can it get till a baby can actually pull it in? We knew our shape was on. Where a lot of the research came in was field testing it on babies, and we ended up entering at at the durometer that we did, that just coincidentally became twice as soft.
And the kind of the thing we had to balance with that was going through consumer product safety testing to make sure that durometer softness, it needed to be to mimic the breastfeeding latch. also would be safe for babies to use ages 0+. So, it was that process.
Wow, that's so you guys started with a need that you personally had, and now here you are sounding like you're a therapist, you're like in this new industry, you know all about silicon. So let me just pivot a little bit and go to Andy for a minute. So thank you, Joy and Jane, for sharing
Thank
that.
you.
And we're talking about business structure, right? And we know that when you start a business, as both Joy and Jane have mentioned, it's really important to understand what's going to give you the right balance of legal protection and benefits when you start your business, because where you start on day one may not be where you end up, right? You may want to change or whatnot. So Andy Williams, thank you for being here with us today. Just a little bit about Andy. He focuses his practice in the areas of real estate, corporate law, and mergers and acquisitions. And he has extensive experience in negotiating and drafting commercial leases, purchase and sale agreements, development agreements, and he also guides clients through every aspect of their real estate transactions. But he also works closely with corporate clients to help them understand and accomplish their business goals, whether they're complex financing, to navigating regulatory requirements. So thank you, Andy, for being here with us today. You've heard both Joy and Jane talk about, how they started and what they've been going through. Can you share a little bit about you as well as, as the industry expert, what do you recommend? How do we choose that business structure? And at what point do we do that? When is the good time to decide what are our needs for our business?
Sure. Happy to. And just a little bit about me. I'm Andy Williams. I'm an attorney here at Carmody, MacDonald. I've been here about 8 years, and Gabriella did a great job of kind of summarizing my transactional practice. It ranges from real estate to corporate and mergers and acquisitions, helping people start their new business, select an entity, all the way through selling it, for hopefully millions of dollars down the line and negotiating those deals. So and I could listen to entrepreneurs like Joy and Jane all day talk about their businesses because they just have so much passion. It's so great. I'm sure that everybody here, enjoyed hearing them talk about their product and their business. And so hopefully I won't be too much of a letdown after that. But I just wanted to talk a little bit about forming, entities, selecting entities, what the differences are, and kind of the process that goes along with that, and the types of things that you can find in the governing documents like an operating agreement. And I think you'll hear some of the same themes that Joy and Jane were already kind of bringing up in what I say. But, as far as when to form a legal entity for your business, I would say on day one, you really want that, because there's a few main benefits to having an entity rather than just doing it, in your own name. Liability protection, okay? That's probably number one that everybody would say. Whether it's a corporation, an LLC, you want a legal entity to be standing in between you and whoever you're dealing with, whether it's, a landlord under a lease, or whether it's, contracts that you're entering into. If you're entering into those in your own name, even if you have a DBA or something like that you're calling your business, if you don't have an entity and any kind of problem arises, they're coming after you, they're coming after your assets. There's no shield of an entity there. So I would strongly encourage everybody to consider, forming something. Now, to me, in most situations for small businesses getting started, I do think an LLC is probably the best route to go for a number of reasons. But flexibility is probably number one. When you have a corporation, whether it's a C Corp, an S Corp, or whatever kind of corporation, there's all kinds of requirements and filing fees and things like that you have to do. You have to file a biannual report with the state of Missouri. You have to maintain a board of directors. You have to have an annual meeting. When you have an LLC, you don't have to do any of that. You have to form it with the state, but you don't have to have an ongoing filing requirement. So a lot of times I see people who started a corporation and then, a few years go by and they never did the biannual report, which is a simple filing, but it's something you have to do and engage with every couple of years. If you don't do that, your entity is dissolved, and that comes with all kinds of problems. You can re-engage it, but you got to hire a lawyer most of the time, and that's time consuming and annoying. With an LLC, once you form it, you don't have to continue to file things with the state. So So flexibility is a big deal with LLCs. You also have the flexibility with an LLC to choose how you're taxed. You can be taxed under the partnership tax code, or you can elect to be taxed as an S corp. So flexibility is key for LLCs. I mean, the other reasons to consider an entity right off the bat are kind of lending yourself legitimacy when you're out there marketing, or if you're talking to a bank, looking for financing, which is, sometimes a little bit further down the line. But if you're looking for investors to bring them on, they're not going to be impressed if you don't have an entity. What are they investing in? They're just kind of giving you money. If you have a corporation or an LLC, you're selling them equity in the company, and everybody understands that. So, it's really something that everybody should really do right off the bat. And it's not that difficult to form an entity. Okay, how do you do that? Whether it's an LLC or a corporation, you or your representative go to the Missouri Secretary of State's website. You take a few minutes to fill out a form, basically, on the website. And as soon as you file that and pay the $50 filing fee, you have an entity. You can operate under that entity. You can sign your contracts as that entity. You can open a bank account in the name of that entity. So it's easy. It's easy and relatively inexpensive to form. Now, there's a few other steps that go along with that. You need to get yourself a federal EIN, which is basically like a social security number for the entity. You do that by going to the IRS's website, and again, filling out a fairly simple form to get the EIN. And then, of course, you need to eventually enter into the governing documents of whatever entity you've selected. If it's a corporation, that means the bylaws and potentially a shareholders agreement. If it's an LLC, that means an operating agreement. So those are the types of things that come after formation. But and I can talk a little bit about the types of provisions that go in those agreements if you'd like me to do that now, Gabriella, or if you want to jump in, that's fine.
Yeah, no, I think that I'm putting some links in the chat so that people know where to go set up their LLC or their corporation with the state of Missouri. But I would love for you to talk a little bit more about the importance of the operating agreement.
Sure.
And any other agreements, especially when you have more than one person in an organization, right?
Sure.
Because even though Jay and Join, it looks like they love each other. They haven't probably had any fights. They haven't had any miscommunications.
We got into a big argument today before this talk, but keep going.
It's always easy when you have no money, right? It's when it's a theory. But once that first penny hits your bank account, it just shifts things whether you want it to or not. So can you talk a little bit about the importance of the operating agreement, and what is it? How do you do it? How does it protect you? Because the other thing besides having an operating agreement is I want to make sure that it's enforceable.
Sure. So yeah, I mean, so an operating agreement is the governing document that goes with an LLC. And just kind of for simplicity, I'm going to talk about things from that lens. Now, if you have a corporation, the operating agreement covers things that would be included both in your bylaws, and if you have a shareholders agreement, those things kind of do the same types of stuff that are in an LLC's operating agreement. So these principles are applicable to all types of entities, but it's hard to talk about things, in multiple ways. So we're going to stick with the operating agreement for now. And actually, Missouri statute and all state statutes require an LLC to have an operating agreement. So I know a lot of people form an LLC and they never get around to documenting that. And you can have an oral operating agreement, so you're not really in breach of the statute. But I strongly recommend putting together a written operating agreement, just as everybody's already said. When you have partners, even if those partners get along fantastically, there's always room for dispute when things are not well defined. And whether that is how much of the company each person owns, how much you've contributed to the company, whether in cash or in other types of equity, whether or not the company can require further contributions from its members. These things are all ripe for dispute, even among the most happy and friendly partners. If something's not spelled out and you haven't thought about it, people can have different views when that thing comes around. So it's important to have some kind of operating agreement. Now, if you have a single member LLC, meaning that only one person owns 100% of the company, that operating agreement can be very short and simple. Usually that's called an operating declaration technically, because you don't have multiple parties for it to be an agreement, but you still want to have something in place. Now, when you have more than one member, you really want to have a little bit more meat on the bone when it comes to the operating agreement. So what kind of things go in there? Well, number one, you want to clearly define who the members are and how much, percent in that company they own. Okay. And it seems obvious, but you would not believe how many disputes you have when people think that, they've put in more effort or more money than the other partner, and they think for whatever legal theory or non-legal theory that they should own more of the company. Well, if you have an operating agreement, there's usually a schedule at the end that says, Jane has X percent, Joy has X percent, and they've contributed X number of dollars. Okay, then you don't have to argue about it. There's no room for argument in that case. It also typically contains guidelines for distribution of money. Okay, so when the company is bringing in money and doing well, and you have available cash, how does that money get distributed? Okay, if you don't have that spelled out, one partner is going to say, "Hey, we've got $20,000 in available cash. Shouldn't we just take this all out of the bank account?" And the other partner is going to say, "Well, no, we need that to pay rent and for reserves and other things." If the operating agreement is in place, it will clearly define, who gets to make that decision, under what circumstances that cash gets distributed. If you have to make distributions every year to pay for people's taxes and things like that, that's obviously a big source of potential dispute that you can nip in the bud by having a good operating agreement. Again, requirements for additional capital contributions. Some companies say, "Hey, you guys have put in X amount of dollars. That's your capital contribution. The company cannot come back to you and ask you for more, no matter what. If it needs more money, it can request it, but it cannot require it." Some other companies say, "Hey, if the managers say, 'Look, guys, we need more operating funds,' the company can require that you put in additional money. And if you don't, then your percentage is going to go down when other people do." So again, another source of potential dispute and potential litigation that you can avoid by clearly defining that in your operating agreement. What else goes in there? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I really think though it's important to understand the things that go in there, right? The points that should be included, and why.
Sure.
But I also, to Jay and Joan's point earlier, is the importance of hiring a professional that could really guide you through some of these to make it enforceable, right? Because if Jay and Joy put in 50%, that does not necessarily mean that they're going to put 50% of the work into the business.
Correct.
And so if that's not spelled out at the end, when they have, millions of dollars every 3 months, are they each going to want the percentage that they started with or the percentage that they perceive they work? So those are all really important to identify early on. And there is a question in the chat about equity. How do you exchange equity for a specific service rendered? For example, they're considering bringing a business development person into the business, but not paid initially.
Sure. So that's a great question, and something that's obviously a hot topic for startups and established companies alike. Is, a lot of times there's a desire to, we don't have money right now, but here you can have a percent or whatever. And a very popular way to do that is what's called a profits interest. Okay, so that is a way of granting non-voting equity that pays that service provider or that key employee a percentage of the profit over a certain threshold value. So they're not getting, the sweat and blood that was put in to bring the company where it is today, but you're saying, "Hey, we're going to give you 2% of whatever we can, increase it from now into the future." And that's something that goes right into the operating agreement, usually as a different class of membership interest. So that's a great question and a thing that a lot of people want to do. And if you don't do that the right way, if you don't use the profits interest format, that's fine. If you want to grant, true 100% equity, to a service provider, but there can be a lot of confusion and disappointment later when you've done that early on with a bunch of people, and then it comes time to make distributions or to sell the company or to get approval from the members, and it turns out that you've got all of these minority members with 1 or 2 or 5% that either, can block a deal or, get more payment than you were initially hoping for. So that's something that really needs to be, ironed out properly, and you need to have a plan in place for how those equity grants are made and managed. So that's a good question.
And then does the operating agreement also talk about, what happens if someone dies or if someone wants to step away from the business?
Definitely. So another big piece of operating agreements are restrictions on transfer. Okay. So, and that covers a whole host of things, but if I'm a member of an LLC and I just don't want to be there anymore, I'm not digging it, and it's not what I thought, and I don't want to be there. A lot of times the operating agreement will say I cannot just go and sell my shares to a random person without following a procedure that's set forth in the operating agreement. Now, there's a lot of reasons for that. Number one, in a small business, like Joy and Jane's business, they've agreed to work together, and to basically get into bed together as business partners. They don't want to wake up tomorrow and have a complete stranger as their business partner. So a lot of times the operating agreement will say, okay, you can sell your interest, but first you have to offer it to the company. And if the company doesn't want to buy it, you have to offer it to the other members pro rata for their shares. And if they've turned that down, then maybe you can go and sell it to somebody else. But that's one way to deal with it. Now, death, disability, divorce, those are all types of situations also that you really want to think about, because again, they can lead to a situation like I just described. One day, all of a sudden, a partner passes away, and now you're dealing with their 5 children that have all their membership interests and have their votes and don't know anything about the business. So a lot of times an operating agreement will say the company is either has the option to purchase those units from the deceased member or is required to do that. And there's a number of different ways to provide for that. You can have a life insurance policy on the partners that are called a key person. They used to be called key man policy, but I don't like to call it a key man policy, a key person policy that pays a set payout to the company that then can fund the buyout of those interests, because the company may not just have cash lying around to buy out a deceased member's heirs, but you still really want to provide for that, because you don't want to all of a sudden be dealing with a business partner that you didn't want to get into bed with. The same thing goes for disability. If somebody, for whatever reason, is no longer able to contribute in the ways that they used to the company due to medical situation or otherwise, you can have the same type of provision that either allows or requires the company or the other members to buy out those units. And in divorce, I mean, do you really want to all of a sudden wake up after a divorce and have your business partner's ex-spouse owning half of their interest and voting half of their interest and participating? You do not. You don't want that. So there are mechanisms where the company and the other partners are able to repurchase those interests and not let somebody who everybody hasn't agreed to let into the company, jump on board with voting rights and other types of rights.
And Andy, I can't help but wonder, are those normal things that you're supposed to think about, or is that something that an attorney or an accountant or somebody else would help remind you about that, right? Because ideally, I love, let's say I'm working with Joy, I love her husband, but I don't necessarily think about that we don't agree on a lot of different things, and that his way of doing business may have a conflict with the trajectory of the business. So at what point do these specific points get discussed?
Yeah, I always find that it's easier to have these conversations, when an attorney or another type of advisor is leading the discussion. It's not easy to just kind of, get together with people you're close with and talk about, well, what happens if you die tomorrow or you get divorced? And they say, well, I'm not going to die. I'm 35. I've got a long life ahead of me. And why would you even say that? Or I'm not going to get divorced. I love my husband or my wife. But when the attorney is going through the scenarios of it, it's a little more impersonal. It's a little easier. I'm happy to kill people off. I'm happy to make them get divorced, theoretically, just to make the points, so that you guys don't have to do that. So it really is worth sitting down, even if it's just for an hour, and going through these types of scenarios so that people can see, yeah, I guess that makes sense. Even if it's unlikely to happen, it could benefit me. It could just as much as it could, benefit another member. And it's unlikely, but we need to have it spelled out, because we don't want to be litigating this later. Spend a little bit of money and time now to avoid a lot of headaches that could potentially, I've seen a lot of companies not make it through these types of disputes because it's expensive to have lawyers in there when things have all gone wrong. It's time consuming. It takes everybody's time away from developing the business, developing the product. And it's not what anybody gets into the business to do, to dispute things with people's heirs or their, ex-husbands or whatever. That's not what business owners want to do. That's what lawyers are here for, to provide for. Hopefully that never happens, but if it does, look at paragraph C, D, and E, and here's how you deal with it, and then off you go. So I definitely think it's a better setup for a third party or an advisor to kind of walk through those things.
Yeah, and I definitely don't want people to think that it's all doom and gloom, right? But it is something that you want to make sure that you consider as part of your legal structure. So now I'd like to go back to Jane and Joy. Now that you've heard Andy kind of talk about some of those things, were they items that are considerations that you all have already discussed?
Most definitely. Very much so. And we were actually having our own commentary because it brought us back, because Andy's exactly right. It is uncomfortable. We both are married, and we love each other's spouses, but you have to go through the what ifs. And just like what we were discussing, I kind of had a reminder, because you do it so long, you make the agreement, you got the paperwork, and you can kind of put it on the back burner so you don't have to have the conversation anymore. But we made the decision when I came into the office to Joy, and with the idea, I said, I want to go at this 50-50 with you. Let's do it 50-50, because but that was our agreement. I felt good about it. And like Andy said, get comfortable with the fact one person might be putting in more daily work, where another person might be putting in more work that's producing the finances, but we got comfortable. We were doing it 50-50, but like, for example, we are both married, and we both said, so what happens if unfortunately one of us was to pass away? We made that agreement that other member would be able to buy out, or the shares, to be able to keep the company within us. And we do have a small percentage to angel investors that we had to have hard conversations with them about. We own our patent. We got the patent with our money through 4 rejections, and that is something we want to remain in our family and our name. But
because what a lot of times people don't realize, but a patent you own personally. I mean, of course, you can develop a legal entity for it as well. But like, if a business went away, we own that patent, and that would get passed down the same way any other thing would in a trust or a will of our own personal 50-50 assets. Now, I will also say that
20% of our district, just to clarify, so 20% of the actual distribution company that distributes our product is what they own 20% of. And we had to iron out. So Joy and I can't, lease anything, or allow someone to be licensed under our patent while we're in business with them, without them getting their percentage. But in the event Joy and I buy them out, or in the event something happens to where that company is gone, that the patent still remains exactly where it is, and we're open to license it out to whoever we want. So it's really good, like Andy said, to think through these with a lawyer in as many scenarios as you can, just so that, and it came up, not all of this happened to us in one sitting.
But I will say that when we started organizing our operating agreement, our attorney, he asked us these questions. Who do you want the company to go for? If she dies, she dies. Like Andy said, like, you need somebody to ask those questions. I don't want to be like, hey, if you die, what do you want to happen? Like, you don't know to ask those types of questions. You need the professional to say, let's go ahead and just get it in writing. You need some time to think about it. But they are the professionals, the one to know to iron out all those potential scenarios. And like, if I were to die and she would have to buy the shares, buy my husband out of his respective shares, right? So all that, and then, you have to get the valuation of the company. They walk you through what that process would look like, depending on however you choose to structure your legal entity.
And we did ask questions along the way. Sometimes we'd have something new would pop up, but I suggest talk to your lawyer around the way, because if you're not communicating with them, they don't know. Like, oh, I didn't realize that you guys took on an investor. I didn't realize that you wanted it structured that way. So it also never hurts to send a quick text or email to your lawyer to say, hey, if we take on an investor, is this going to change your operating agreement? Or if Joy and I don't want the patent, them to anything to do with it, do we need to put that in the paperwork? Please don't ever be afraid if things pop up in your mind as you think about it. Send an email, do your lawyer a favor, because you never want to end up in a situation they're reading it out or something comes up and you're looking like, I thought you did that. I thought that was included. And they're like, we never talked about it. You know, so we always put things in email and in paper trails as well. That never hurts.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everybody. And definitely we'll be back again next month, the fourth Thursday of the month, with some more information and amazing entrepreneurs. Thank you, Joy and Jane. And thank you so much, Andy.